In this video, I'll show you a 27-year timeline, from Hugo Chavez to U.S. forces landing in Caracas just 72 hours ago. I'll explain how Venezuela shifted $24.7 billion a year in oil sales out of the U.S. dollar, and why that decision made it a target. I'll show you why 14 countries are now accelerating their exit from the dollar system, and why gold at $4,450 and silver at $76 are only the beginning of a historic precious metals bull run that could push gold to $5,500 and silver to $150 by late 2026. On January 3, 2026, something happened that will change the global financial system forever. The United States launched military operations in Venezuela, captured President Nicolas Maduro, and flew him to U.S. custody on drug trafficking charges. The White House called it law enforcement. The rest of the world called it an invasion. Financial markets exploded. Gold surged nearly 3% in a single session. Silver jumped 7%. Safe haven assets went vertical. You saw the headlines. You heard the official story about drugs and democracy. But that wasn't what this was about. This was about the petrodollar. It was about Venezuela moving away from dollar-priced oil and sending a message to every oil-producing nation on Earth. Abandon the dollar and your government will be removed. Here's what Washington didn't think through. By invading Venezuela to enforce the petrodollar, they exposed the system for what it really is, not an economic agreement, but a protection racket backed by military force. And once that reality is exposed, the system doesn't get stronger. It accelerates toward collapse. That collapse is exactly why gold and silver are exploding right now. Venezuela isn't just another South American country. It holds the largest proven oil reserves on the planet, over 303 billion barrels, more than Saudi Arabia, more than Russia, more than Iraq. That's nearly 18% of global proven reserves, enough to supply the world for almost 10 years at current consumption. Rather than economic strength, smart money runs to the only assets that can't be printed, manipulated, or invaded out of existence: physical gold and physical silver. Because when the petrodollar dies, precious metals don't just go up, they go parabolic. Venezuela, the world's largest oil prize. Let me start with what most people don't understand about Venezuela. This isn't just another South American country. Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves on the planet, 303.8 billion barrels, more than Saudi Arabia's 258 billion, more than Russia's 80 billion, more than Iraq's 145 billion. Venezuela sits on 18% of the world's total proven oil reserves. For context, that's enough oil to supply the entire world's current consumption for 9.6 years. For 50 years, Venezuela was a loyal member of the petrodollar system. They sold oil. The U.S. bought it in dollars. Venezuela took those dollars and bought U.S. goods, U.S. weapons, and U.S. Treasury bonds. It was a closed loop. Venezuela got rich. The U.S. got cheap oil and a buyer for its debt. Everybody won. But this system had one absolute requirement. Venezuela had to stay inside the dollar system. They had to price oil in dollars, accept payment in dollars, keep reserves in dollars. The moment they tried to leave, the entire arrangement would break down. And for decades, this wasn't a problem. Venezuelan presidents understood the deal. Then, in 1999, Hugo Chavez was elected, and he didn't agree to the deal. Hugo Chavez, the man who challenged the petrodollar. Hugo Chavez was a former military officer who ran on economic nationalism and anti-imperialism. He looked at Venezuela's oil wealth and asked a simple question. Why are we selling our oil to the United States for dollars when we could sell it to the highest bidder in any currency? In 2000, Chavez made his first major move. He traveled to Iraq and met with Saddam Hussein during the sanctions era. Chavez shook hands with Saddam on television and announced Venezuela would sell oil to Iraq in exchange for goods, not dollars. Barter. This was a direct challenge to the petrodollar. In 2005, Chavez began selling oil to China under long-term contracts. The terms: China provides infrastructure loans, Venezuela repays in oil, no dollars involved. This became the Venezuela-China Oil for Loans program that eventually reached $60 billion. In 2007, Chavez pulled Venezuela out of the IMF and World Bank. He said these institutions were tools of U.S. economic control. He paid off all debts to them and stopped participating in their programs. By 2008, Chavez was openly calling for the end of the petrodollar at the United Nations. He proposed a South American currency called the sucre to facilitate trade without dollars. He was building alliances with Iran, Russia, and China based on creating a non-dollar trading bloc. The U.S. government watched all of this and realized they had a problem. Venezuela wasn't just leaving the petrodollar. They were actively building an alternative system and recruiting other countries to join them. But the U.S. didn't invade in 2008. They tried other methods first. The Failed Regime Change Playbook 2002, CIA-backed coup attempt. Chavez was briefly removed from power. He returned within 48 hours. The coup failed. 2004. US-funded recall referendum. Opposition groups, NGOs, media campaigns tried to turn Venezuelans against Chavez. He won with 59% of the vote. Failed again. So the US moved to economic warfare. If they couldn't remove Chavez directly, they'd strangle Venezuela's economy until the people removed him themselves. Chavez died of cancer in 2013. Nicolas Maduro took over and continued Chavez's policies, and the US sanctions intensified dramatically. The Sanctions War, 2015-2025. 2015, Obama declared Venezuela a national security threat. First sanctions imposed. 2017, Trump administration. Massively escalated sanctions. Banned US companies from buying Venezuelan oil. 13.7 billion a year in revenue. Gone froze $7 billion in Venezuelan assets in US banks. Prohibited insurance, shipping services for Venezuelan oil tankers. Banned Venezuela from issuing debt in US markets. Prohibited sale of spare parts for oil infrastructure. The result? Venezuela's oil production collapsed 80%, from 2.4 million barrels hours a day in 2016 to 500,000 barrels hours a day by 2020. Oil revenue fell from 56 billion to 11 billion annually. Hyperinflation hit 1.7 million%. The economy imploded. The US government said this was about democracy and human rights. But let me show you the comparison that proves this was about the petrodollar. Iran, heavily sanctioned. Why? Sells oil in non-dollar currencies. Russia, heavily sanctioned after 2022. Why? Demanded payment in rubles, not dollars. Saudi Arabia, terrible human rights record. Killed Khashoggi. Bombs Yemen. No sanctions. Why? Because Saudi Arabia sells oil exclusively in dollars and recycles those dollars into US Treasury bonds. The pattern is unmistakable. If you sell oil in dollars, you're protected. If you sell oil in anything else, you're sanctioned, isolated, and regime changed. Venezuela understood this. So they made a choice. If the US is going to destroy our economy anyway, we might as well completely abandon the dollar and build an alternative system. Venezuela's $24.7 billion dollar exit. Here's what Venezuela did between 2017 and 2025. China. Yuan sales, 500,000 barrels day by 2024. All transactions in Yuan, $0, 13.7 billion a year in non-dollar sales. India, rupee sales, 200,000 barrels a day paid in rupees, 5.5 billion a year in non-dollar sales. Russia. Barter system. Venezuela shipped oil to Russia. Russia shipped wheat, machinery, military equipment. No currency involved. Direct barter. Iran, bilateral trade. Venezuela. Traded oil for Iranian gasoline and chemicals, 2 billion a year in non-dollar trade. The petro-cryptocurrency. Launched a crypto supposedly backed by oil reserves. Failed to gain adoption, but showed Venezuela's direction, oil for debt with China. Venezuela owed China $20 billion in infrastructure loans repaid in oil shipments, not dollars. Added up, by 2025, Venezuela was selling approximately 900,000 barrels a day in non-dollar arrangements. At 75 barrel, that's $24.7 billion annually outside the US dollar system. For a country with the world's largest oil reserves, this was unacceptable to the United States. But Venezuela wasn't alone. This was part of a broader trend. Russia, 5 million barrels a day in non-dollar sales. Iran, 1.5 million barrels a day in Yuan, euros. Saudi Arabia, negotiating with China to accept Yuan. By late 2025, an estimated 15% of global oil trade was occurring in non-dollar currencies. That's approximately 410 billion a year out of $2.74 trillion in total global oil sales. Projections suggested this could reach 25-30% by 2028. And then came the deal that broke everything. December 28, 2025. The breaking point. China and Venezuela announced a new agreement, $80 billion over 5 years. China would rebuild Venezuela's oil infrastructure, refineries, pipelines, ports. In exchange, Venezuela would supply 1.2 million barrels a day to China. All transactions in Yuan. This wasn't just about oil sales. This was about infrastructure. China was integrating Venezuela into the Yuan system permanently. This was China locking in the world's largest oil reserves outside the dollar system for decades. The US government made a decision. If we allow this to proceed, the petrodollar is finished. 6 days later, they invaded. January 3rd, 2026, Operation Petrodollar Enforcement. At 3:47 a.m. local time, US Special Operations Forces landed at multiple locations in Caracas. The stated objective? Arrest Nicolas Maduro under a 2020 federal indictment for drug trafficking. But the operation was conducted by US military special forces, not law enforcement. This was an act of war disguised as law enforcement. Maduro was captured. flown to a U.S. military aircraft, and transported to federal custody. He's currently being held awaiting trial. The U.S. immediately recognized Juan Guaido, who'd been claiming to be interim president since 2019, as Venezuela's legitimate leader. Guaido was flown back to Caracas on January 4th. The official White House statement: "Today, the United States took decisive action to dismantle a narco-terrorist regime. Maduro is a criminal, not a president. His arrest is an act of justice, not an act of war." The rest of the world saw it differently. China called it an illegal invasion and suspended diplomatic talks with the U.S. Russia called an emergency UN Security Council session, introduced a condemnation resolution. U.S. vetoed it. Vote 14-1. UN General Assembly. 147 countries voted to condemn the operation. Only the U.S. and 4 others voted no. But the condemnations don't matter. What matters is what happens next. What happened next? Markets go insane. Within hours of the Venezuela operation, global financial markets erupted. Gold surged 2.9% to 4.455 O's. Safe haven buying exploded. Indian gold futures hit records from 140 and 465 per 10 grams. Silver jumped 7% to 76.63 Oz, outperformed gold by 2.4x. Massive industrial plus monetary demand. Oil spiked from $74 to $89 a barrel in 72 hours, 20% increase in 3 days. Every oil exporter wondering if their next yuan versus dollar. Yuan gained 1.8% in 2 days. Normally, U.S. military power strengthens the dollar. This time, yuan strengthened because China positioned as alternative global response. Russia accelerated oil for goods barter programs. Saudi Arabia postponed defense talks with U.S. OPEC issued statement of grave concern. 14 countries called for alternative payment system. The invasion was supposed to strengthen the petrodollar by bringing Venezuela back into the system. Instead, it's accelerating de-dollarization because it revealed the dollar system is coercive, not voluntary. Why gold and silver are exploding. Let me explain exactly why precious metals surged and why this is just the beginning. Historical pattern. Geopolitics. Sure, gold. Every major geopolitical crisis triggers safe haven demand. 1979, 80, Iranian Revolution, plus Soviet Afghanistan, gold 226 to 850, 276%. 2001, 9/11, gold began bull run 270 to $1,900 2020. COVID-19, gold rallied to 275 2022. Russia-Ukraine, gold spiked to $2,050. Now, 2026, Venezuela invasion, gold already at 44.5. The Trump escalation factor. This isn't one isolated incident. Trump is escalating on multiple fronts simultaneously. Venezuela, military operations ongoing. Mexico, warned of potential strikes over drug trafficking. Colombia, mentioned as potential target. Greenland, restated ambitions to acquire from Denmark Christopher Wong, oversee Chinese banking corp. The episode reinforced a backdrop of geopolitical uncertainty. Alexander Zumpfe, Heraeus Metals Germany. This situation has reactivated safe haven demand on top of existing concerns about geopolitics, energy supply, and monetary policy. Why silver jumped 7%, bigger than gold's 2.9%. Silver's move was explosive. Here's why. 1. Higher volatility. Silver has beta 2 to 3x gold. When gold moves 1%, silver moves 2 to 3%. 2. Dual nature. Silver is both monetary, safe haven, and industrial, solar, EVs, defense. 3. Supply chain. Fears, Sandy Pandey, Basav. Capital. The attack jeopardized sea routes that Peru and Chad, world's biggest silver exporters, use for exports. Peru is the world's second largest silver producer. Shipping disruptions through Caribbean are causing physical silver supply tightens. 4. Existing momentum. Silver delivered 147% gains in 2025. Hit all-time high 83.62 on December 29th. The metal has massive momentum already. The real reason, precious metals are surging. Here's the uncomfortable truth the mainstream financial media won't tell you. The petrodollar is dying, and precious metals are the only alternative. For 50 years, the dollar was the reserve currency because it was the most liquid, the most trusted, the most stable, backed by the world's largest economy. This was soft power, economic dominance. Countries held dollars because dollars were useful. But now, the petrodollar is maintained through hard power, military invasions. If you try to leave, you get regime changed. This fundamentally changes how countries view the dollar. They don't hold dollars because they're useful. They hold dollars because they're afraid of what happens if they don't. And when your currency is maintained through fear rather than economic strength, it's fragile. The moment countries believe they can escape without being invaded, they will. That moment is coming, and precious metals are the lifeboat. 14 countries. Accelerating dollar exit. Within 72 hours of the Venezuela invasion, 14 countries issued a joint statement calling for creation of an alternative international payment system that does not rely on the US dollar. Signatories included China, Russia, Iran, Brazil, South Africa, Indonesia, Turkey, plus 7 others. This is the beginning of a formal non-dollar bloc. What these countries are doing: Saudi Arabia postponed defense talks with US, accelerating negotiations with China to accept Yuan for 20% of oil sales. Russia, Finance Minister: Venezuela has shown us what happens when you depend on the dollar. We will not make that mistake. Accelerating oil for goods barter with India, China, BRICS nations. China, positioning Yuan as the safe alternative. Suspended diplomatic talks with US, offering countries military protection if they join Yuan system. Why this matters for precious metals. When countries exit the dollar system, they need to diversify reserves, buy gold, settle trade, use gold-backed mechanisms, protect wealth, accumulate physical silver. Central banks accumulated 634 tons of gold in 2025 alone. That trend is now accelerating. Price targets, where gold and silver are headed. Let's talk numbers because investors want actionable information. Gold targets: current, 44.54 ounces. Near-term resistance, 4,550, December 26 ATH. Bullish scenarios: conservative, 4,705% above ATH. Moderate, 5,000, psychological barrier. Aggressive, 5,500 plus if escalation intensifies. Expert opinion. Market analysts quoted by Yuan: precious metals will remain supported, targeting $5,000 Oz for gold by late 2026. Inflation-adjusted historical parallel. If gold reaches its 1980 inflation-adjusted peak, that's approximately $3,200, $3,500 in today's dollars. We're already above that. This isn't a bubble. This is gold repricing to reflect reality. Silver targets: current, 76.63 Sol Rosie. Near-term resistance, $83.62, December 29th ATH. Bullish scenarios: conservative, $85, break above ATH. Moderate, $100, psychological barrier. Aggressive, 120, 150 if supply crisis plus geopolitics combine. Gold-silver ratio. Logic, historical ratio, 45-55 per 1. If gold hits $5,000, silver should trade at 90 to 110 hours. If gold hits $5,500, silver should trade at $100, $120. Supply. Fundamentals: fifth consecutive deficit year. Cumulative shortage. 2021-25, 820 million Oz Peru shipping routes threaten China export restrictions. Active industrial demand. Solar, EVs. Surging silver at $76 is not expensive. It's undervalued relative to fundamentals. The timeline, how this unfolds. Here's my projection for how the petrodollar collapse accelerates. Q1 2026, January-March. Venezuela back in dollar system temporarily. Oil hits 95 barrel gas prices. US $4.20. Gallon countries quietly accelerate de-dollarization to avoid being next target. Gold, $4,600, $4,800. Silver, $80, $85. Q2 2026, April-June. Saudi Arabia announces 15% of oil sales in Yuan. Frame it as economic diversification. Oil hits $105 barrel dollar, falls 4% against major currencies. Gold, $4,900, $5,200. Silver, $95, $110. Q3 2026, July-September. Nigeria, Angola, Kazakhstan announce Yuan acceptance dollars share of global oil transactions, 85%, 72%. Oil hits 118th barrel gas prices. US $5.60 gallon gold, $5,300, $5,600. Silver, $115, $130 in Q4 2026, October-December. US threatens sanctions on countries accepting Yuan backfires. More countries see this as confirmation system is coercive. BRICS announce new reserve currency backed by commodities. Oil hits 134 barrel dollar, falls 18% from January peak dollars global reserve share. Below 50% for first time since WO2. Gold, $5,500, $6,000. Silver, $140, $160. This is not fantasy. This is the logical progression when a currency system maintained through force starts collapsing. Who wins and who loses? Losers. The American people. Gas, 7-8 gallon. By late 2027, cost of living, plus 35% savings lose, 25% purchasing power. Retirement accounts destroyed dollar-loyal countries. Kuwait, UAE, wondering if they made wrong choice. Could have diversified, chose loyalty. Reward, Watch dollar collapse, reserves lose value. Winners. China locked in energy supplies in Yuan, built alternative financial system positioned as refuge from dollar system. When dollar falls 25%, Yuan gains 35% relative value. Countries with hard assets, gold reserves, oil reserves, minimal dollar debt can trade in alternative currencies. Insulated from dollar collapse, physical gold and silver holders, gold at 5,000 plus, 12% gain from here, silver at 150, 96% gain from here. Wealth preserved while currency collapses. No counterparty risk. What you should do right now, practical action steps. 1. Reduce dollar exposure. Immediately. If you have cash and bonds in dollars, you're facing 25-35% loss over the next 24 months. Move 40% of liquid assets into foreign currencies, Swiss franc, Singapore dollar, Norwegian krone, gold, physical or allocated, silver, physical preferred. 2. Buy energy stocks. Oil going to $150 barrel. Energy companies will print money, Exxon, Chevron, ConocoPhillips, pay dividends that will rise with oil prices. 3. Accumulate physical gold and silver. Gold currently $44.50, target $4,500 plus. Silver currently $76, target $150 plus. Don't wait for pullbacks that may never come. Dollar cost average weekly or monthly. Physical, paper, not allocated in vaults where you can't touch it, not ETFs that can suspend redemptions. In your possession. 4. Prepare for higher costs. Budget for gas, 7-8 gallon. By late 2027, food, plus 140% imported goods, plus 135%. This is coming. Position yourself now. 5. Watch geopolitical triggers. If US invades another country, timeline accelerates. If Saudi announces Yuan acceptance, that's the trigger. Position before announcements, not after. 6. Understand this is permanent. The petrodollar isn't coming back. The era where US printed unlimited money for 50 years is over. What comes next? Lower US standard of living, higher costs, weaker currency, gold and silver as wealth preservation. The Venezuela case study. Venezuela is now the case study that will be analyzed in every foreign ministry and central bank worldwide. The lesson. A country with world's largest oil reserves tried to leave the petrodollar. They sold oil in yuan, built barter systems, created bilateral mechanisms. U.S. response? Invasion. Remove government, install puppet regime, force country back into dollar system. The takeaway. The dollar isn't maintained through economic strength. It's maintained through military enforcement. This changes everything. Countries now see the dollar system as coercive. They don't hold dollars because dollars are useful. They hold dollars because they're afraid. And when a currency is maintained through fear, it's fragile. The moment countries believe they can escape, they will. China is providing that escape route. Belt and road infrastructure in 150 countries, CIPS payment system, alternative to SWIFT, military protection for countries leaving dollar system. After January 3rd, more countries will take China's offer. Why gold, $5,000, and silver $150 are conservative? Let me explain why these targets are actually conservative. Gold at $5,000. That's only 12% above current $4,455. Gold gained 64% in 2025 alone. A 12% move in 2026 as the petrodollar collapses? That's nothing. If gold simply matches its 1979-1980 performance during last petrodollar crisis, we're looking at $6,000, $7,000. Silver at $150. That's 96% from current $76. Silver gained 147% in 2025, a 96% gain in 2026 as geopolitical chaos plus supply crisis plus industrial demand combine, entirely plausible. If silver reaches its inflation-adjusted 1980 high of $54.50, which equals $220 in today's dollars, we're looking at 200 plus in silver. These aren't moonshot predictions. These are historical precedents playing out in real time. The bottom line. On January 3rd, 2026, the United States invaded Venezuela to enforce the petrodollar. They captured a sitting president. They installed a puppet regime. They forced Venezuela back into the dollar system. But in doing so, they revealed that the petrodollar is maintained through military force, not economic strength. And when you expose that reality, you don't strengthen the system. You accelerate its collapse. 14 countries are now racing to exit the dollar system before they become the next Venezuela. Gold surged to $44.55. Silver exploded to $76. And this is just the beginning. The petrodollar is dying. Not in 10 years, not in 5 years, right now. And the only assets that will protect you are the ones that can't be printed, can't be manipulated, can't be invaded out of existence. have been money for 5,000 years, physical gold, physical silver. You have 12, 18 months before the full weight of this hits your wallet. You've been warned.